This is the story of a bunch of Glasgow anarchists in 1984, during a period of social history that records Thatcher's destruction of working class institutions such as unions and council housing, and laid the foundations of the neoliberal policies of Reaganomics imported from the USA. Neoliberalism is simple to understand. It means everything for us, that means business, and nothing for you, that means the public. The first thing that needs to be destroyed for this system to function is public institutions, like unionisation and any sense of a common good or cause. As in Thatcher's words, there is no such thing as society, only individualism. In Britain's transformation to neoliberalism, the minor unions, which were the strongest and needed to be destroyed, suffered the full brunt of Thatcher's army of right-wing ideologues, including the police, the army and the press. The crushing of the miners through any means necessary, and they were mean, opened the floodgates of corporations and business becoming the mainstay of government politics. One such conglomerate in Thatcher's army of misery and willing to do her dirty work was Price Waterhouse, a firm of accountants who have grown to be one of the fourth biggest professional service networks in the world. The following will give you some idea in how they make their money by producing nothing and starving the poor. In this case, their sequestration of the South Wales miners' funds during the 1984 strike. The striking miners were refused benefits during the strike, so the idea of confiscating the miners' funds was basically to starve them out. Much the same way as the Bank of England at present are blocking the release of 31 tonnes of Venezuelan gold to help the US starve them out. So the story begins the day we took the White Tower. Brian Biggins' account in Glasgow of the occupation of accountants Price Waterhouse offices in support of the South Wales miners. At 7:30am on Tuesday the 4th of September 1984, 12 anarchists stormed a multi-storey office block in Glasgow city centre. They went in to occupy the headquarters of accountants Price Waterhouse, the millionaire outfit which sequestrated the South Wales miners' funds during the strike. As the newspapers reported the occupation at the time, the operation was executed with military precision. It took the team 10 minutes from entering the building to securing themselves behind sheet metal doors in the offices of Price Waterhouse on the 13th floor. About £600 of equipment, including hammers, drills, saws, timber, were carried past the startled staff. Lifts were occupied and protests ignored. All the keys were lifted from the security guard's desk. Everyone knew his task and skillfully completed it. Not that everything was perfect. The security guard managed to regain entry to the foyer before all the equipment had been moved in. Plus the elevators were too small and didn't easily accommodate the 8x4 sheet metalling. And an officer had to be ejected from Price Waterhouse as the occupation got underway. As it proved impossible to commandeer all 3 lifts for the 13th floor, that area came under police control sooner than planned. Also on our side, an early casualty was a driver who was arrested at the hire depot as he returned the van which the team arrived in. In spite of these reverses, the operation was a complete success. Fire doors leading to the common stairwell were nailed up. The 12 had captured the offices of Price Waterhouse and were securely barricaded in. Police who arrived at 7:50 am could only rage, threaten and kick frustratingly at the steel doors out in the corridor as those inside calmly outlined their reasons for their peaceful occupation. For this was no exercise in bravado, but a serious social act. The group were convinced of the need for direct action against Pricewaterhouse. Contrary to popular reporting, this company did not simply carry out a mundane legal job of sequestration against minors. They entered the fight with all the commitment of partisans. This firm went much further than the law demanded. Not content with seizing the 350,000 administrative funds belonging to the South Wales miners, they proceeded to grab an additional 400,000 in a provident fund and money collected from hardship cases, food and clothing for families. To permit these gangsters, we thought, to commit legalised robbery seemed to all Clydeside anarchists an invitation to even more adventurous tactics by the boss class. By 8:30, a senior officer was knocking at the door seeking to parley. He was told, 1. that his minions had threatened violence against us, which was true. 2. that all anarchists present had been medically examined and photographed the previous day, not quite true. And 3. that they had nothing more to say to him and that he should fetch a representative of Pricewaterhouse to consider some more important questions. At 9 am, a Mr. Campbell arrived. He said he was a partner and senior executive of the company in Scotland, and that he and the staff of 30 were seriously put out by the occupation and were anxious to come in and to start work. He was informed that the Welsh miners and their families were given even more serious inconveniences by the actions of his firm, Pricewaterhouse. 2 conditions were put to Campbell for the evacuation of the building: that the funds of the South Wales miners be restored to them, that Pricewaterhouse undertook no further sequestrations. Campbell said it would take a little time to get a response from the head office in Birmingham. The occupants promised to be patient. An hour later, 10 am, Campbell slipped a typed letter over the steel door. In it, he acknowledged the anarchist action, but replied negatively to both points. However, the note went on to say that if the South Wales miners would identify those funds which were earmarked for clothing and food relief, Pricewaterhouse would release them. Campbell was told to wait half an hour while a meeting was held to consider the letter. He was also reminded by one of the group that there was a lot of valuable equipment in the office and that any violent action could inadvertently result in an awful lot of damage. The suite of offices contained about 18 rooms, the entire floor, and was ultra modern. There were no manual typewriters, only a few IBM golf ball typewriters, but the place was stuffed with terminals, VDUs, word processors, telex machines, photocopiers, etc. Certainly 100 grand's worth of equipment. The really valuable stuff, however, was the diskettes. Many disks containing all the files plus work in progress. About 900 of these were lying around, all capable of storing thousands of words. By this time the building was surrounded by the guardians of law and order. 2 60-foot banners were stretched around the 13th floor, reading "Glasgow backs the miners" and "Employed Solidarity." Electricity had been cut off, several phones were out, and large numbers of police occupied the corridors. At 10:45, Campbell was informed that the meeting had considered his letter and would investigate the authenticity of his claim about their willingness to release identified funds. The next several hours were spent in talks with the South Wales Miners headquarters and to Price Waterman's man outside the door. This period afforded many opportunities to go through their extensive filing system. It was a real eye-opener. This multi-million-pound outfit has accountancy as only a small part of its business. It concentrates on handling takeover bids, forecasting money trends, overseas investment, etc. It was clear that a big percentage of the bog monopolies are clients of Price Waterhouse. Dinner was served around 12, but almost all resisted the temptation of Price Waterhouse's extensive cellar. Baths Act 79, not a great year, but... From the windows, leaflets were scattered at 5-minute intervals. Meanwhile, outside, supporters were gathering in the streets below. Press and news agencies had been contacted about the occupation and the reasons for it. The South Wales NUM says it was being reported locally and were delighted by the action. Meanwhile, the cops were bored and were boring. They were stealthily trying to gain access through the fire door, but the door hadn't simply been nailed up. It was the subject of a superb piece of civil engineering by Castlemilk Constructions, unemployed, so the boys in blue were disappointed in their efforts to breach the fire door. The discussion with the South Wales NUM revealed that they were not prepared to identify those funds which were for the relief of hardship. They claimed that to do so would be to recognise the courts, which was contrary to union policy and in conflict with the Wembley Conference decisions which had been reinforced by the Brighton TUC the previous day. One of the team, Enrico Malatesta, in speaking to Emlyn Jenkins, SWNUM, observed that they would prefer not to recognise any court. However, the anarchists did not see the task of making demands of the miners, but of exposing the scab outfit, Price Waterhouse. Certainly some publicity was being gained. Radio, TV and newspapers were carrying reports of the action and giving garbled accounts of the reasons for it. Meantime, leaflets were being distributed at job centres and DSS offices, but at the same time sympathisers were being warned off by the cops from giving out material near the occupation. As the afternoon progressed, several things became clear. It was not possible to force Price Waterhouse into restoring the miners' funds. 2. The cops were becoming increasingly restive and seemed likely to indulge in heroics. 3. One of the doors was less secure than the others and seemed vulnerable to a determined assault. Considering these factors, it was decided to dismantle the barricades. Campbell of Price Waterhouse conceded that if no malicious damage had been done, then charges would not be brought against the occupying anarchist force. There were serious doubts about this. At 4:15 p.m, having removed most barricades, the police were allowed to enter by one door. The 12 militants were invited to collect their tools and belongings and proceed to the exit, where large quantities of police awaited them. The steam coming from the inspector's ears warned the anarchist what was to come. "I'm in charge now," he cried, and went on to announce that the group would be handcuffed in pairs, taken to the local station and charged with breach of the peace and criminal damage. Thereafter, the 12 were subjected to the usual indignitaries, photographed, fingerprinted, given a body search, and locked in single cells for the night. No violence was used, but it was particularly hard on those 9 members of the group who were vegans and had nothing but bread and water for 24 hours. Next day, they were packed 6 to a 5 by 10 foot cell and later appeared at the Sheriff Court. There they pled not guilty to all charges and were released on bail. Trial was fixed for the 10th of December. In retrospect, the group felt that the action was relatively successful, not from the narrow view of publicity for the Clydeside anarchists, but because it was a positive action on behalf of the miners to the ruling class offensive. The negative aspect lies in the anarchists having to do the job at all. The impotent and ossified trade union seems incapable of anything but a negative reaction to the boss class. Social democracy and the bureaucratisation of trade union movement have disarmed the working classes. Lullabies of class peace, parliamentary and legal paths to social harmony have virtually paralysed the proletariat's instinct for self-defence. In conclusion, the group hoped that the action would help to forge closer links between Clydeside anarchists and the miners for whom they have campaigned and collected more than £2,000. Perhaps it will galvanise more workers into direct action and show them that defence against the boss is not confined with the narrow limits of branch resolutions and letters to MPs and councillors. At the very least, Clydeside anarchists have given the lie to those who charged that we couldn't organise a booze up in a brewery. Price Waterhouse can testify to that. Brian Biggins, Glasgow, 13th of September 1984.